So welcome, everybody. This is an important meeting for the Chicago Central Area Committee uh, because it gives us a retrospective on what we've been up to since Mayor Lightfoot took office on May 20th. Let me set the stage a bit. Um, Chris Hall and many others worked on the Central City investment white paper that we did before that inauguration. And on in the Sun Times that day, they featured as a front page article our work. That Central City effort was a predecessor to a number of other things that some of our speakers are going to talk about today. And then way back in 2012, we did Schwartz in the Illinois Medical District and also in Gary Airport. And that type of technical assistance manifested itself in 5 corridor work studies that we undertook prior to Commissioner Cox coming to town. And on March 11th, just before the country shut down with the pandemic, Commissioner Cox met with our executive committee and invited us to help on the Invest South and West Chicago initiative of the mayors. And we're going to hear detail today from 2 public servants that I want to tell you quite a bit about, actually. Our first speaker will be Gerardo Garcia, who's an architect and an urban designer and a deputy commissioner in the Chicago Department of Planning. In civic practice, Gerardo has been immersed into achieving the city's urban and economic development goals by leading teams in the delivery of projects ranging from visioning and design guidelines to infrastructure improvements. He's an advocate of civic engagement and design excellence in the development of city plans and policies. What I didn't know about Gerardo, because he and his colleague Cindy, that I'll introduce in a moment, they're self-effacing. I need to tell you more about Gerardo's background. He's an adjunct professor at the College of Urban Planning at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Previously, he's been a guest critic and guest lecturer at the School of Visual Arts in New York. His work has been presented at the New York City Mayor's Office for Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, Columbia University, and Rodham Institute in the Ukraine. He has a bachelor's degree in architecture from Syracuse and a Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Columbia University's Graduate School of Architectural Planning and Preservation. He currently lives in his native little village with his wife and son. So he's one of our speakers, and he'll cover Invest South and West. The other speaker is Cindy Roubik. She's an assistant commissioner leading the Central Planning Region and has been with the City of Chicago's DPD since 2005. Cindy manages the design and planning review process for large-scale development proposals and planning initiatives within the city's central area, including its lakefront, riverfront, and industrial corridors. She's overseeing all master plan projects, including Brownsville Lakefront redevelopment proposal, and she has led updates to the Chicago River Design Guidelines, the Fulton Market Innovation District, and the Halstead Triangle Plan. She's LEED certified professional, and prior to civil service, she worked as a licensed architect and lead designer for several mixed-use high-rise projects. She's originally from Montreal and an alumnus of McGill. So I've worked almost daily with these folks for over a year, and we've got McKinsey level talent in City Hall. It's like we're Singapore on the lake, or maybe Singapore is Chicago on the bay. But in any case, we've got top flight people, and that's one of the reasons why so many of you who are listening in today have given so selflessly of your time and effort. So without further ado, Gerardo, can you tell us about Invest Southwest and get us pumped up to even do more for you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for the time today. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Great. As Greg mentioned, and I see a lot of familiar faces on the line here today, but over the course of the year, have really had the opportunity to work with a lot of CCAC members in developing RFPs for Invest Southwest. And today, for those of you that this work will be obviously very familiar to many of you. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is just an overview of that work, and really going to try to convey the principles on which we've operated to develop many of these RFPs throughout our Invest Southwest communities. And so really the first question is that we want to answer is, why did we select an RFP strategy for Invest Southwest? And we do that, and we did that really because we felt that an RFP allowed us to establish a vision in partnership with communities, and to really be proactive about how our communities on the south and west sides would be transformed, and doing that in a way that kind of set the bar for proposals that we would receive from developers. And what you see here is some of the conceptual renderings that came out of our first round of RFPs for Chicago Avenue in Austin. The other reason why we chose to select an RFP strategy for Invest Southwest is really the competitive nature of the RFP. And so by setting the vision, again, with the help and support of CCAC members, we were able to solicit multiple responses for each site. And the benefit of that, as we like to say, is that we then were able to provide communities options with how their proposals developed. And as many of you, or how their communities developed, and as many of you might know, for communities on the south and west sides, having options in development is really something that we're very proud that we're really for the first time doing on a larger scale. And so some of the images that you see here are responses to the Englewood RFP site from our first round of RFPs. And an RFP also allowed us to be transparent and to have a community engagement process that provided opportunities for folks on the south and west sides to, chime in on development, not just on the vision for development, but also on who would be doing that development. And so what you see on the screen here is a screen grab from one of our developer meetings, right? And so essentially, once developers submitted their proposals, there's an opportunity for them to actually pitch their proposal to the community. And we take that feedback into consideration as part of our evaluation. And so the other reason for an RFP strategy is to really be able to take larger sites and create momentum for communities. And so what you see on the screen here is Englewood Square, the first phase of which consisted of a Whole Foods and some kind of strip mall retail. And so we really wanted to think about the next phase of Englewood Square and how we make that more urban and more connected to the community. And so the large site allowed us to essentially release an RFP in packages or subsets of the site to, again, kind of maximize the competitive environment that we were hoping to create. And there's a why and there's the how, right? And the RFP strategy is really yielding some results that we feel are really aligned with the principles, certainly of our department and of this administration. And the first thing that we're doing is we're ensuring diversity. We're ensuring that diversity and inclusion are prerequisites for any response. So to date, we've received 24 proposals for 3 rounds of RFPs, and 20 of those are led by minority developers or teams where a minority developer is the lead. And so that's really an important part of these RFPs, where we set out as criteria that we wanted to build wealth in communities on the south and west sides. And we've been really impressed by the level of partnership and creativity and partnership that we've seen from teams. And some of that work through kind of the mentorship that CCAC has done and relationship building with some of the new organizations like SEMD, for example. The other thing that we're hoping to achieve is to ensure design excellence. What you see on the screen here are icons of our 10 design excellence principles, which we published last summer. And really, design excellence for our department right now is an ethos, and it goes just beyond aesthetics, as many of the designers in the room hopefully understand. But this idea that inclusive design processes also are going to yield equitable development. So it goes just beyond the financial. But this notion that folks on the south and west side, those communities are just as worthy of excellent design as a loop. And we also systemize that. So one of the things that we did in partnership with the Architecture Center and AIA Chicago, and with support from the Pritzker Traubert Foundation, was that we compiled, or an independent jury, I should say, compiled a list of 32 pre-qualified design services firms for Invest Southwest. And so what we did essentially is create a tool for developers to really be able to ensure that they're meeting our priorities of design excellence, but also our priorities around equity and inclusion. So this list, we're very proud to say, is as diverse as the city of Chicago itself. And again, in the realm of design excellence, this idea of options. So what you see in the larger image on the upper right-hand site was the conceptual vision that was created with support from CCAC, with a team led by Perkins and Will. And that then translated into the rest of the responses around it that you see on the screen. So again, the idea that we are setting the bar for the level of design that we want to see in communities and development, and then providing those communities with options through a competitive process. And again, we want to ensure that the community is driving that vision. So since Invest Southwest kicked off, we've had over 250 community meetings, 180 roundtables in the last 18 months. And some of the images that you see here are our Invest Southwest kickoffs, which were held pre-pandemic and averaged around 500 people in attendance throughout the south and west sides. And we asked questions at those kickoffs, like, what buildings in your neighborhood have special meaning to you? And so you see here, going back to 18 months, the Englewood Firehouse, the Laramie State Bank, the Healthy Hub building in Auburn Gresham. And so these all correspond in one way or another to our first round of RFP sites. So really, we were going where folks were telling us where their priorities and where they saw their assets in their community and these underutilized or vacant historic assets. And then again, some sample work, again, led by the CCA team here, of presenting communities with alternatives and helping them visualize how the different opportunity sites in their communities could develop, and then coming to consensus around which one to move forward with. And again, the other thing that we are hoping to accomplish is to have that inclusive selection process. So you can see here, again, another screenshot from the developer meeting. And to date, we've had, essentially 14 of these meetings, one for each RFP respondent in each round, and they average over 100 plus folks virtually. And just to give everyone a sense of the timeline for an RFP, we call this the 6-month period of visioning and engagement. Was really how we started these, going back to last spring and bringing the roundtable together and establishing a stakeholder group, bringing on the CCAC teams, and defining the evaluation criteria and goals of the RFP. And then a response period. Typically, we've given developers 3 to 4 months to respond to that vision. And then we take another 2 to 3 months to evaluate those proposals. And then another 6 to 9 months for selecting the proposal, but also going just through the negotiation and approvals process to bring these to fruition. Typically, our CCAC teams have participated in step 1 for about 2 months out of that 6-month process. But really, those 2 months, you can see kind of kick off a chain of really impactful and meaningful work, for over the course of a year for us. And just to give everyone a flavor of kind of everything that we've seen, these are RFP responses in the different Invest Southwest communities, and you can kind of see the different approaches that folks have taken to sites, really the level of design that we're seeing, and the embrace of principles of walkability and just good urban design. But before I sign off, I think it's equally important to acknowledge that for each of those proposals or RFP responses that we received, there was a vision that was set forth, by teams led by designers, by folks in this room, that really went the extra mile to do this work and to create these visions that are really going to trigger the transformation for communities on the south and west sides.
Thank you, Gerardo. So one of the things that we've thought about at CCAC over the years is what's our distinctive competence? Our largest membership cohort is design professionals. And I'd like to call on a couple of them. There are many volunteers, and we're basically dividing this program into 2 halves. So the goal will be to wrap up this piece of it by 12:15 so we can move to Cindy's project. But Andrew and Chris Hall and Andrew Broderick were leaders in this, as well as Christine Carlisle and Kim Dowdell and others that I don't have the gallery view on, so I can't see everybody. But we'll start with Andrew and Chris with some remarks about what it's like to be on one of these teams, and then we'll take questions from the group at large. So Andrew, you want to start?
Yeah, sure, Greg, thanks. And appreciate that overview, Gerardo. Some of that was nice to see as like a compilation of the work and different efforts across the different corridors. So I appreciate that. So thanks for that. I think just 2 observations from my perspective. Again, I lead our urban design practice here with Perkins and Will. And I think at the onset of the Invest Southwest effort, I worked specifically on in the Austin neighborhood on Chicago Avenue. And that was a year ago, right, where we were starting. And it's interesting to see the maturation of the process over a year. And I think that, it was really exciting in a way to help figure out the scope and what our deliverable was and how we think about individual sites versus the entire corridor. And I thought that one of the hallmark of what CCAC brought to this is that multidisciplinary focus. We worked with Sam Schwartz, LJC, Stephen Friedman, Jim Kutil. We worked with a wider range of design and real estate professionals. Compass Real Estate was involved. Malik was a part of this team. And I think it was a really helpful coming together in a pro bono basis to help forecast not just the design vision, which I think we led with design for sure, but also the market viability. And to me, to fast forward to today, I think it's really exciting to see the awarding of Laramie State Bank property back in March and where that's heading in the future for that particular project, but also the other catalyst sites in the future, not just that one, but the next ripples of the pond along Chicago Avenue. And I thought, and that's where the staying power of some of the corridor work with guided investment can really be proven out over time. So very rewarding experience, and looking forward to continuing to follow it and be part of it.
Thank you. Are you in our midst? Chris Hall?
Hi. Yeah, just echoing everything Andrew just said, and also maybe a quick reminder that when we did this, you know, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, it was an incredible shift in ways of working. And, you know, it's kind of a miracle that we were able to get this done. In that first round, kind of conceptualizing essentially a significant evolution of the RFP process that the city does and what the content is, and then also engage a community in an entirely new way, in a time when there were incredible distractions and difficulties that people were facing. So we've got so used to working this way now. We should remind ourselves what a shift it was a year ago, and it was kind of there was some magic at work in order to kind of deliver the project. I think the team working idea is really important. You know, on our team, you know, Greg, you were involved, but there was Steve Fifield, his colleague Joe Pister, Joe Wallace was providing market analysis and feasibility, and within our team, David Scully and Tiara Hughes was involved, and Diane Legg was involved on the design side as well, with, you know, lots of really great ideas. I think one of the interesting things was the engagement process as well, because given the time we were in and the environment we were in, there were kind of two key objectives for the engagement process. The first was to build confidence and trust in the RFP process, because we weren't having face-to-face meetings. We were doing this in a new way. The city was doing this in a new way. Invest Southwest was new. So I think, you know, part of the reflection is that we really had to build confidence and trust in the process with the community, as well as getting buy-in to the development proposal and the design proposal. And I think what's interesting is that combination of, you know, professional input and engagement input. I think the RFP we put out, or the projects we worked on at 79th and on 79th Street at 79th and Halsted, you know, the RFP was for 50 affordable housing units. The proposal that's come back is for 56. You know, it's really kind of close. And in terms of the design, some of the aesthetics are a little different, but the fundamentals are really there. That walkability, active ground floors, responding to the neighborhood, responding to other investments around it, and the scale of development. But I think we wouldn't have been able to do it without really well-organized local partners. So the Greater Auburn Gresham CDC was really important, because they had a cohort and a network of collaborators locally. And so they were able to kind of marshal the engagement process during a difficult time. So I think all of those ingredients are necessary for success in the future. And I think those are the lessons that were learned in the first round and are now kind of embedded in the practice going forward.
Thank you, Chris. Kim or others who have participated in one of these, anybody, just take the floor.
If I could chime in really quickly, you know, I do think, reacting to kind of Andrew and Chris's comments, not enough was certainly said during my presentation around the interdisciplinary nature of these teams. And yes, designers led, but we couldn't have put out these visions without knowing that they were economically and financially feasible. And so I think that was really a critical aspect of this exercise. And understanding, you know, working with our Department of Housing, you know, kind of building the ship as we went in terms of like how we utilize tax credits and trying to be creative in order to get this different type of product out into the market, if you will. So definitely just want to acknowledge that while led by designer, these teams were very much interdisciplinary.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think it was really nice to have these very well-rounded teams to help to flesh out the RFPs. And, you know, frankly, just from a personal standpoint, it was great to get to know so many people through this through these efforts, and to build stronger relationships with other CCAC members. So it's, you know, been a delight. I've worked on the Bronzeville RFP with a number of other folks who are sitting in the room, so it's good to get the gang back together again. In fact, I think we have on our calendars an in-person reunion coming up in a few weeks. So looking forward to that. But, you know, it was a really great experience to not only support get to know the community better, but also support them through this work and, you know, bring together lots of great input on, you know, the RFP process.
Thanks, Kim.
I would think, Greg.
If I could for just 1 second, because I just opened my gallery view. I should know this because this is how I go to church every Sunday, and I want to see who's there. But the person who deserves credit for this idea in a very real sense is Christine Carlisle, because she's the one who stood up the first one of those corridors that the Burnham Council frankly worked on. And then after Christine says something, Matt Dumich and Rana Lee, they did 3 of these things. So first with you, Christine.
Okay, yes, it was, it's been an interesting process for all of us. And it did start with a relationship with World Business Chicago and Bernice Gabriel Johnson, and sort of she raised her hand at a random meeting, saying, "I need help in these neighborhoods." So I brought that idea to the CCAC, and we had our own corridors. This is pre Invest Southwest that we were engaged with. So we did that a year beforehand. But I have to say, so SCB in combination with Smith Group, we led the Englewood effort. It had some manageability issues. And I think that was, I think, the lesson learned that we had a very big area. We probably had maybe 20 to 30 sites along the corridors of 63rd and Halsted. So that did take some narrowing down, I think, to be able to get down to the one site. And I think that was part of our process with the city, to what was manageable, what was doable. We had differences of opinions on, you know, what the scale of development would be to build it out. And so we had a team from John Buck and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on our assessor's name, but they went through a lot of due diligence through, you know, looking at the financials for what was going to work in their understanding of the packages of incentives. And so I think that was one thing that we struggled with a lot during the process. And then we also had, Englewood was kind of on fire at that point in terms of our meetings, as Gerardo, you'll remember. It was, you know, we had roundtables where people were pretty excited and a little confrontational. So being able to get through all of that was an effort. And I think it was a great success, and look where it is now. But it was one that there were moments throughout the process, I think, of being able to bring in the focus to what was necessary, what was going to be the real catalyst, and where the effort should be focused on, so that we could deliver something that was going to be worthwhile for everybody, and to have those fruits and that vision of what was going to take place in the next few years. So,
thank you, Christine. And Kevin Burns was mentioned.
I'm sorry. Thank you for Kevin.
And he showed up more than once, and so did Steve Friedman show up more than
once.
You know, it's a pretty remarkable.
There was so much effort put into this. It was incredible, the amount of time and energy that went into it. So.
And I have to say, Christine, Englewood was probably one of our more challenging communities. And you'll be pleased to know that it's actually the one going the smoothest right now, in terms of, you know, getting the selected developer towards a redevelopment agreement and their community engagement. So I think that's also just a testament to everyone's efforts on the CCAC side.
Thanks, Gerardo. Matt or Rana or others?
Greg, this is Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas.
Well, one of the things we greatly appreciated was an opportunity, because we took a look. We were on 3 of these also, but we had an opportunity to take a look at what, you know, technology infrastructure is looking like in some of these areas. And we're currently exploring with both the state and the city, you know, some of the broadband and other pieces that can be brought to bear to Invest Southwest to make each of these projects a beacon for technology and infrastructure and a way to distribute that infrastructure in the facility and around the given area. There are opportunities to do that in a number of these, and we're looking forward to putting the pieces together so that those opportunities can be actually captured.
Excellent.
Hey everyone, Matt Dimich from Smith Group. Nice to see so many partners on the phone here. And as was mentioned, our team was involved in actually 3 of the RFPs. One of the things that I think is so interesting about this, this effort is the way that we're all coming to the table together and interacting in different ways. And I think we all learn from that. So we have designers, we have developers, and we have the city, and we have the community. And I think that exchange and kind of a open dialogue about community issues created really kind of a robust vision, but also, like I said, I really do think the DPD learned from developer perspective in a way that we're interacting you wouldn't normally, I'll say, in the real world. And similarly, as architects and designers working openly with developers, I think we had a little bit of a different relationship too, to kind of push and pull both the economic realities from the community needs. So it was a really interesting process, and we enjoyed learning from it.
Steve, I saw you had your hand up. Are there others who?
Oh, yes. And Habitat was privileged to work on the recent one with Gerardo and others from the city, the 79th Street corridor, South Shore, South Chicago, a great experience. Even in the midst of COVID and the snow, we took a nice walk down 79th Street. It was a sensational team, very proud to work on that team. And it was, as had just said by Matt, it is really true. It was developers really getting some wonderful appreciation of the designers and architects on the team. I was in awe of their work. They saw how the development community works, and working with the city, very important. And we really appreciate the candor that they shared with us, and hopefully they appreciated our candor as well. We also worked with 2 aldermen, which was interesting and at times a bit challenging, and got to really see an area of the city that most of us had not experienced. So I think all in all, it was a very positive experience. Thanks.
So I'd like to pose a question to the group, because we're going to have an opportunity to do some more of these. And, so put on your critical caps. I mean, we don't want to be an echo chamber only for positive. We learn through negative. And I have a hunch, Rana, and maybe some others might have some ideas on how we can make this better.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I echo everyone's comments. This was just an unbelievable opportunity to work with everyone and to improve our city overall. I would say, one of the things that I would encourage is, after every round of Invest Southwest, we've done 3, is to invite our team members on the phone and do a plus delta. Hey, during this process, what are the things that went well that we should continue? Right? And every team is going to have different things. And then, the deltas would be, what are the things that were bumpy that could use some improvement, right? And so that we can learn from each other. So DPD, the CCA member teams, but also we can inform each other's process, right? Because I bet there's a couple things that were bumpy across all of the RFPs that if we all put our heads together, we could maybe come up with some ways to improve that next time. So, I'll just give out a couple thoughts. One is the schedule is so fast, right? And I know, Gerardo, you've shared with us that there are challenges and reasons why that is, right? And I so appreciated everybody coming to get to the table and doing things. So I think, the biggest thing that I learned in working with SCB in Englewood was, making sure that our full complement of the CCA team, we got the right disciplines at the table, right? And in some cases we did, in other cases we didn't, right? And how that would have helped. Also, I think managing expectations on our end of hours. I had asked Kelly many times, hey, what do you think the commitment would be? Right. And of course, it wouldn't have mattered what the answer was because we had no idea. Right. And so that the member organizations can better align the right resources and continuity of those resources to make sure that those RFP efforts are done to the best way possible.
Thank you, Ron. We've got about 7 minutes left, so your CCAC is not a shy group. Anybody raise your hand or just speak up? Well, I'm going to put it back to Gerardo because Cindy has a huge amount of stuff to cover, as well as a lot of members who were part of that side of our effort. So Gerardo, what's next?
Yeah, and I was going to say, Ron, I personally would actually appreciate it. It's always usually better to do those things fresh, but even going back and revisiting with some of the teams from the first 3 rounds and having those discussions. So, we did kind of we are in a little bit of a much needed downtime in terms of RFP production, right? And so, but that doesn't mean that we should sit by idly. And so I think that's one of the things that I'll put on my to-do to follow up with folks and have those conversations to really kind of systemize a little bit better how we crank these out. The other thing that we're doing, and I know Greg, I don't know if you've shared this with folks, but the kind of a year in review, right? So I think this is step 1 of really putting together some kind of document that highlights the work and all of the great firms and folks that contributed to the work, but also kind of plants the seed for what's next. And hopefully we can use that as a way to get more support for CCAC in the future. And then, our commissioner has talked about the cadence of quarterly RFPs for Invest Southwest communities. And so, Andrew mentioned, particularly on Chicago Avenue and some of these other corridors where we looked at multiple sites and maybe we only RFP'd one. But what does it look like to go back and dust off some of that work and maybe bring more opportunities to the development community? It's certainly a conversation we're having internally. And once we're able to provide a little bit more clarity, we'll connect back with CCAC leadership to think about how we get that going, as soon as this fall.
And so as a transition then to Forward Together and now the recovery roadmap, CCAC's been busy on so many different levels: executive director search, thinking about a strategic planning process that will be undertaken, and building off of, frankly, the success that we've enjoyed and getting to the point of financial sustainability. Pritzker Traubert has backed us, and I think there will be more of that coming as we tell this story to a wider audience, certainly to the foundation community. Unless we forget, we also have a sister organization, Alliance for Regional Growth. A shout out to Clint. He worked very, very hard in April to get an EDA grant in. And so there's an awful lot of irons in the fire. Cindy, why don't you tell us about one of those?
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg, and thanks for inviting me to join your meeting today. I do have a little presentation to share as well, so why don't I go through that? It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. And I do want to warn you, I am working from home today and it's lunchtime, so you may hear some background noise of my kids having lunch there. So let me just make sure can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So We have been working very closely with folks on the CCAC group, and you know, this started, I want to say, last fall, because we had some of the members outreach to us at DPD saying that, you know, they want to do a white paper and webinars and some working group sessions regarding the recovery, specifically focused on the center of the city, you know, Chicago's downtown. And we said, that's great. We actually want to do the same thing. And so instead of having two kind of competing initiatives, we said, let's align forces. And luckily, that was well received. That suggestion was very well received. So we've had a lot of help. We could not have gone through this initiative without CCAC members and their leadership. We've in fact been meeting, you know, twice a week for, I don't know, 4 months, it seems like. So it's a lot of work. And again, you know, the work that was done was just kind of helping coordinate the schedule, which has been really a difficult challenge, helping to come up with the content of the report, the goals of the report, the content of the meetings, drafting the agendas for the meetings, really facilitating the meetings as well. So it was a really great experience, and we're heading towards the end here of this process in terms of publishing the report. So we were building off of the recovery task force that was published last summer. That was a citywide, of course, recovery task force. And we really wanted to focus a little bit more on the central city. And the reason for that was, of course, you know, the impact that the central city has had on remote work, the impact that the looting last summer has had on the properties and just the feelings of safety and, you know, the lack of people on the street. We were really concerned with the impact, both short-term and long-term, to, you know, the health and vitality of our downtown. So really, our goal for this initiative was to coordinate immediate actions, you know, for the reopening period, but also to maximize our recovery in the next several years. And we, of course, knew we were, you know, as all the discussion about the important initiatives going on in West Southwest, and we're also doing engagement work and planning work citywide under the We Will citywide plan. And so this was an important topic for us to focus on the city's central area, and make sure that, you know, we're coming out of this recovery in a way that can retain and attract current jobs and attract new jobs, but retain and attract new residents as well. So we had a pretty elaborate schedule and meetings, a cadence of meetings, and this proved to be one of the harder things to coordinate logistically. We actually started with a kickoff meeting in November before this calendar kind of shows up, and then you know, we had been targeting launching the report by the middle of May. We're a couple of weeks delayed from that, just in terms of scheduling the rollout for it, but we will be rolling it out very, very shortly. And then, of course, you know, why do we need a central city recovery roadmap? Well, you know, of course, half of all of the city's jobs are in and around downtown. We've had a lot pre-pandemic. We had an incredible amount of job growth. We also had the fastest growing downtown for residential population of any US city. And a lot of companies have been relocating even through the pandemic to the center of Chicago. It's of course home to many of our great cultural institutions. And pre-pandemic, we also had a very healthy growth in tourism. So we want to make sure that as we come out of the recovery, we're able to capitalize and go back to some of that growth pattern. So how did we divide our group? Of course, we started the kickoff meeting and there was like over 100 people, which is a little unwieldy. So we decided very quickly we needed to divide ourselves into subcommittees. And some of these subcommittees were actually themes that the CCAC folks had already identified, a theme of economy, destination, and livability. And you'll recall the webinars done in December followed those themes. And so really we divided our groups into those themes and added the transportation and mobility, the movement theme as well. And out of those subcommittee meetings and discussions, breakout sessions, you know, we identified 90 actions, and they really fall along 4 themes. Communicate was a big one, and this was an important part about our meetings. And really the first critical issue was that, you know, we were doing a great job kind of explaining the health guidance and the health data and the metrics, but we also needed to communicate, you know, the public safety initiatives, the initiatives that CTA and Metro were doing to clean their cars, to bring people back on transit, feel comfortable using transit, and that sort of thing. So, you know, we were discussing that very early on. And then activate, of course, as we are able to reopen. And at the time we were meeting in November, it was a pretty big difference to where we are today. We did not have, no one had a vaccine. So it was very different mental, like we did not know how long it would take for us to be in this position where we're going to be in phase 5 on Friday, which is fantastic. And then a return, of course, a return to work, but return of the festivals, returning to, in-person conventions. These were all important actions as well to part of our reopening and recovery. And then invest is more longer term. How do we invest in priorities and actions that will help us grow and thrive in the next, in the next few years and few decades. And some of these actions, this was something very important as well. You know, we, because everything had to tie with the health metrics and the data, and we did not want to wait until the report was issued to do some of these announcements. So some of these actions have already been announced, and you'll recognize some of those in that later slide. But, you know, just in terms of the 4 themes and some of the ideas of the actions, you know, they are geared around, of course, the first and foremost, health and safety, but transit safety, our Open Chicago initiative. And of course, activate, we want to make sure that there's a reason for people to come back downtown. It's not just to go back downtown to work, but also, you know, what new festivals and events can we create to entice people back as well to enjoy downtown. And then, a return to schools, of course, return to offices, streets and parks. We'll have programming again, and venues and conventions, and then investing in longer term improvements. Affordable housing is a big one to make sure that the downtown can continue to thrive. You know, we want to make sure people can afford to live near where they work. So, as I said, some of these have actions that were developed as part of this engagement and initiative have already been announced. The Open Chicago initiative to communicate Chicago's reopening. CTA then launched the When You're Ready, We're Ready marketing campaign. A lot of people don't realize, but CTA's bus and train service has really been continuing throughout the pandemic. And they've also increased their cleaning services. So that it really is when you take public transit, it really is clean and safe. Everyone's wearing a mask, and they're also distributing masks for free to the public as part of this initiative as well. And alongside that, you know, we worked with some major employers, BOMA, World Business Chicago, and Chicago Loop Alliance to coordinate return to work announcements. which is an important part of bringing people back to the heart of the city. And then Chicago Loop Alliance is going to be starting this summer, Sundays on States, which is a special event street closure that will have programming, of course, and other activation features starting in the middle of July. And then, you know, as part of this engagement as well, the residents got involved. One of the subcommittees was the residents and community group, and they banded together pretty early on to coordinate across community cleanup. You know, this initiative, it was really important. It wasn't just the public sector saying, this is what we're going to do. We really wanted this to be a collective call to action. And so we asked the stakeholders in this engagement process to tell us, you know, what plans do you have and what are you planning to do to help us with this process to get people more engaged in our successful reopening. And so then here's just some of the short-term actions that are identified in the roadmap. Of course, Sundays on State has already been announced, but we're also working on Mag Mile placemaking and special events. Millennium Park concerts and programming, again, will be starting this summer. We'll be working on some storefront activation and art installations as well. And then, of course, you know, all the returns to the park programming, markets, neighborhood festivals, Navy Pier, all the river tours, the McCormick in-person conventions. This is all part of our ecosystem that is happening, that we kind of all need to align these sectors together. And then we are also working on citywide festivals. Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events have been an integral part of this initiative. And these are, while these are citywide initiatives, a lot of these programming events will be taking place in the center of the city, in our main, you know, park spaces and venues as well. And then, of course, we also have citywide grant programs, you know, the Chicago Alfresco for outdoor dining, community areas, and then Chicago Presents for venues to help them fund reopening events so that tickets could be free. So that really, again, it's about enticing people back out into this lifestyle that we had pre-pandemic. And then Arts 77 as well as another program that's being run by Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. I mean, one of the main themes that coming out of this engagement was that, you know, the cultural venues were the first to close and they will be the last to open, but really, we think cultural activation will help us lead the way to a strong recovery, because that's what we all really missed during this past year of social isolation. And then this is just a little bit more of a peek, a sneak peek as well into our investment priorities. We're going to be doing more corridor planning, focusing specifically on the Mag Mile. They've been, of course, impacted by the changes in the retail sector. And then LaSalle Street, which, you know, was struggling even before the pandemic, but now with the office sector being impacted by the pandemic, you know, we do need to focus how these buildings can be adaptively reused and what are the resources they will need to do that. And then Chicago Loop Alliance is going to be starting back their State Street Corridor plan this fall. So we've got really those three corridors we're going to be focusing on. And at the same time, we're also, you know, advancing, of course, our SSAs and keeping and monitoring them and supporting them. But we are looking at this other tool, the business improvement districts, because, you know, other large cities use this tool to really benefit their business improvement areas. And in some ways, it's a better tool than the SSA tool. So we want to look at that, but it does require state legislation. So right now, it's just kind of working groups convening and doing some research towards trying to make a decision if we're going to push for that legislation in Springfield. Of course, we want to attract high growth sectors in some of these growing industries. And then we want to support emerging sectors, of course, and enhance the transit, pedestrian, and bicycle experience. This is something, of course, a silver lining throughout the pandemic is, we are experiencing our public spaces and streets in a different way. And it's really given us an opportunity to rethink how streets and sidewalks should be used. And then, of course, we do want to support more affordable housing, especially in the city's central area. And so we have the updated ARO, which is great, but we're also looking to be more proactive to support the affordable housing units in the heart of the loop and in adjacent neighborhoods around the loop. And then the central area plan was last updated in 2009 and before that in 2003. So it's definitely time for a refresher. So that's something that we will be looking to do alongside the We Will citywide plan. That's really it. Happy to answer any questions or hear feedback. Oh, Greg, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. That was a tour de force. One of the tools that we used, and I want to call on Chris and Andrew and Jane and Richard if he's on the phone or the screen with us, and I think Malik and Kim were all part of the tech team. So Chris, let me give it to you first in terms of how we created an armature that helped deliver this work product. You're, Chris, muted.
Unmute.
Thank you.
I think we all got universally muted. There's like the god of mute somewhere turning us all off. So it's interesting. Cindy started off talking about kind of the Burnham Council webinars early on, and I think what was interesting about this process was many of us were thinking the same thing at the same time, and certainly building off the work we did a few years ago with the Central City for All white paper, a really strong sense that we had to grasp the challenge of coming out of it's a pandemic, but also the deepest economic recession we'd seen in a decade, and hopefully we don't see another one in another decade, but a real shock to the system and a real acceleration of some retail, hotel, transportation, and workplace trends. So I think in terms of the organization of this, those Burnham Council webinars provided kind of a structure of ideas around the economy, livability, visitation, and then adding transportation and movement. And that provided a structure to organize input from people, as well as kind of the technical assistance, facilitation, and product generation coming from this group. I think what was really interesting about that process was one level, the huge numbers of people who committed to participate in the process. So, there were the likes of us, but there were also a series of engagement meetings that brought in, 40 or 50 people to each one. And, the commitment was incredible. So there's a level of optimism there that we can take away, which I think was really important. I think it was also really dynamic. We started this in the depths of winter, and boy, it felt great. It wasn't clear we were in the second kind of wave. It wasn't clear where we were going with the vaccination, and the mood wasn't good. But that evolved over time. And, I think we pushed it, and also people started to feel better as the weather improved and, the wider situation improved. So I think people went through a process of looking at real near term, and then we're really starting to think about, what's the medium and long term. I think the other dynamic was cross-fertilization and cross-pollination between these work streams. And how often within groups, people were talking about, within the economics group, people were talking about transportation. Within the residents group, they were talking about culture. And how much, we have to think about these things holistically. And then the structure also allowed for group meetings. There are plenary meetings where people were able to cross-fertilize, and then the co-chairs of those groups also were brought together as well at key moments. And I think that process was really important to kind of create a rounded, holistic strategy, but also one that encompassed like a real focus on this year, but then also an understanding that it doesn't stop with this year. The agenda continues. And then also the central city and neighborhoods are closely linked together. The success of each depends on the other. And there's a real opportunity to enhance the success of both through a successful approach to the central city, but linking that growth to job opportunities, business opportunities, housing opportunities for neighborhood residents as well. So those for me were kind of key takeaways.
Thank you, Chris. Jane, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, Greg. Yeah, so I was the team lead for the transportation, kind of that added group. And, my experience comprised of, developing, helping with the technical report, the meeting with the commissioner and the CTA president, as well as their senior staff. And, I think kind of to Chris's point, something that I really enjoyed most as part of this experience was kind of being a part of the organization and discussion of the subcommittee meetings. It was really exciting to kind of see the very large and diverse group that we got, and really also hearing, it's just very insightful to hear their different experiences with COVID and their different perspectives really coming out of it. There's a lot of people that were bringing really big ideas to the table, trying to make change. And, they really recognized the importance of this moment in shifting modes and thinking more critically about how our culture really influences our travel behavior. And I think something else that was really interesting, as well as really underscoring the importance of kind of these partnerships and who's really taking ownership of some of these initiatives that we're coming up with. There's a lot of discussions about, how to kind of move forward with a lot of these things. And, one of the things that having this large subcommittee group that was really, excited and wanted to participate was that there's a lot of opportunities to form more partnerships and take ownership of some of the initiatives that we were coming up with. So it was really great experience.
Thank you, Jane. Kim, you led residential. You want to speak up?
Sure. Yeah. As a downtown resident, it was, it was very, very interesting in that in particular, the livability of, our city, our city's central area. And I agree with Chris that everything is really linked together, those four, categories. But for the residents and community group, which I had the privilege of leading our tech team, we kind of broke our work down into, or our observations based on the many meetings with our co-chairs, Bonnie and Debbie, and the subcommittee, which included a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. We had a really well-rounded group, but it really boiled down to four major things. One is addressing safety in the central city, as was discussed earlier, activating our downtown storefronts in the public realm for residents in particular. Oftentimes, I think there's a focus on activation for tourists, but residents also want to feel like there are things specific to them as well. And then also improving resident services and amenities, specifically relating to educational, housing, and open space opportunities. And then the last item was attracting new residents to the central area through target marketing and incentive programs and policies. So those were the four major things that we sort of focused on as a group. But I would say just overall the experience of similar to with Invest Southwest, working with new people, reconnecting with people that I already knew, and just developing the strategy in partnership with the city was a great privilege, and I'm really glad to have been a part of it.
Thanks, Kim. Andrew, and before you take the floor, Andrew, one of the things that was striking is our Burnham Council younger legs do make a difference. And they stepped up in such a way to staff the tech teams. You want to speak a little bit to that, Andrew, as well as your experience?
Yeah, Greg, that'd be great. Yeah, you know, I'm president of the Burnham Council, and I think my colleagues on the council were heavily engaged, right? So Jane and David, Malik, so many others as well. So it was really helpful to be part of and at the table through the process. I felt like one takeaway that Chris mentioned too in his opening remarks that I just want to underscore is the role of our co-chairs and across the 4 committees. And they really operated, and there was a little bit of coalition building with the group of, there was 8, right? So 4 different committees, two co-chairs each. And their conversations across one another was like kind of the heart of the process in terms of keeping us prioritized, focused, and like and then making sure we're clear in our recommendations. And I felt there was a tension between addressing the near-term issues, which our report really focuses on. The recovery roadmap really is a 2021 document, but also focusing with some of the longer-term or at least medium-term ideas out there. And I felt there was like a tension that we had to navigate through pretty tactfully. But in the end, I think it was nicely resolved. But there were certainly some discussions there. And I just felt like the conversations between Jack Lavin at the Chicagoland Chamber, Kelly Welsh at the Civic Committee, they were the 2 co-chairs on the business subcommittee, and with the City of Chicago agencies was a helpful dialogue, actually, really, to hear between the private sector and the public sector coming together. So I think, you know, CCAC's role as convener and facilitator was helpful there. And I think the overall construction of the subcommittees and the co-chairs through the deputy mayor's office was super helpful and like served as an armature through the process to lead to a good product. And now the proof's in the pudding, because now it's about doing. But it's amazing to like go back in time 6 months ago and think about how much in our report has already been done in a way. If you think about the Open Chicago, the return to transit ambassadors, you know, it's almost, we can't go fast enough with the news coming out, you know, almost daily with some positive stories and some things we're hitting on in terms of taking action.
So I'm going to ask Chris and Cindy and Andrew and others to sort of future search, if you will, about what happens next. And I want to frankly put sort of a challenge opportunity out there. I'm a fan of teams, and I remember a seminal book on the formation of teams. It actually looked at the Manhattan Project. It looked at the Clinton 1992 campaign that came together and what we've got here, it seems to me, we're the most diverse economy in the country, Chicago. We have an incredible collection of intellectual talent at our great universities. We have some of the best foundations in the country, MacArthur, Pritzker, Joyce, others. Through this group, we have the Alliance for Regional Development, which gives us the strength of the Midwest. When James Conant was the president of Harvard in the 1930s, he decided to raid the Big Ten. And he got professors and students out of the Midwest, and Harvard's never been the same since. So the challenge, I think, is, can we be that convener? I know we can do it at the project level. I know we can do it in terms of a major initiative. One of the things that Clint and others have been tasked with is to look at the 25 different organizations. We have a matrix made on that, Cindy, that talks about funding sources. We're going to get the 990s and look at where their money comes from. We're going to find out who their boards of directors are. And then through process and team building, which will lead to trust, I hope, we may be able to have a more cohesive conversation. The key to this, of course, is Mayor Lightfoot gets another 4 years, but that's a different discussion. So what I've come away with through all of these experiences, I'm frankly in awe of the planning talents that are on these screens right now. Because if you do plan things and you measure it and then you benchmark it and then you look back to see whether you've done it or not, that leads to real results. So Chris, you want to take the floor with some ideas about where we might go next, and then dialogue with Cindy and Andrew and others?
Yeah, I think the convening opportunity, this is really opportune time to think about convening, particularly as people start to physically come back into a space, but also it's interesting, through the process we just had, we heard voices from, from the West Loop organization and, from South Loop, from Chinatown, from resident organizations in near North. And there's an opportunity and a space to create kind of a convening of voices across this growing, it's not the Loop anymore. We feel like it's beyond the traditional notion of a downtown. It's a central city, reflecting what's happening in big cities around the world. This is a dynamic, mixed-use central city. And there's an opportunity to, I think, to build on the energy of the process we've just been through, to kind of continue to convene organizations that have kind of a geographic focus, maybe, or they may be local chambers of commerce or local development corporations, and start to kind of build a larger conversation there. I think there's also kind of in some ways, a convening that can happen that speaks to the relationship between downtown and neighborhoods. And I think, Greg, you and I have been on calls with Corporate Coalition and, had discussions with Skills for Chicagoland, those organizations that are looking at what are the business to business employment, hiring, training links between downtown opportunity and neighborhood residents. So for me, I think those are, and this isn't cohered completely, but I think those are two work streams, is to kind of, convening groups who are rooted in the diversity of the central city, but then also looking to continue the agenda about how we link central city success to neighborhood opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think that we can relate the convening to the specific actions outlined in the roadmap. So, like what you said about, recruiting jobs, and then we really can target then the topic and target who the participants of the meeting would be. I think, to me, I think that would be really worthwhile on multiple action items in the report. So that it's not just, we publish a report and that's it. I mean, I know we're also doing corridor planning, we're doing other work but I think for some of these other action items, I do think, and I know some of the other co-chairs are planning to convene more regularly to make sure that their action items are implemented. But for the ones that, we really feel strongly about, and if we don't think that there's, a clear next step, then I think we should work on that. I think that's a great idea.
You're not a bashful group, so yourself and weigh in. Clint, did you?
I also want to say, and maybe it wasn't mentioned before, but I think the stakeholders that we included in this initiative ranged greatly. So we had CEOs of large companies, but we also had, and we had Broadway in Chicago, and we had, McCormick Convention and Navy Pier, but we also had, the chamber organizations and the resident groups and, neighborhood organizations. So it was really, we heard from a variety of different voices, which I think was really important in our discussions. And I hope that we can continue to do that in our future convenings.
Point well made.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I've been staffing CCAC for these past few months, so I got to see both of these projects through a unique lens. And what I really appreciated was the public sector and the private sector working together. And if I'm one of those few people who have worked in both, and it's amazing that people in the public sector are often frustrated that people in the private sector don't understand or appreciate something. And people in the private sector often get frustrated that people in the public sector don't understand or appreciate something. And these two were two projects where those two different worlds work together and we're pulling in the same direction. And so it really made sense for the private sector, in this case CCAC and our membership firms, to help the city write better RFPs for Invest Southwest, because they knew how those who are going to be responding to those RFPs would approach them. And better RFPs led to better proposals, and better proposals are leading to better projects. Same thing with Forward Together, which we're now calling the Recovery Roadmap. If you want the private sector to be a part of the solutions, you need to have the private sector involved in coming up with them. And so it's really been interesting and fulfilling to see those two worlds working together. And I hope that can be a model for future collaboration.
Thank you, Clint. Well, I don't believe I'm going to be able to give you back time, but you know, it's a longer meeting than normal because we jumped right into it. I was struck. Cindy, you remember some of those calls that we had in January, the first week of January, and we felt like we were at sea because we had so many different groups that we had to meld, you know, and everybody stepped up. But, you know, Count Metternich or Talleyrand, some of the world's greatest diplomats were present among our number in terms of the way you helped navigate all of that, that welter of potential conflict that drove to a good outcome. Clint, why don't you tell us what's up next, and then we'll give people some more of their day back.
Sure. Well, again, if anybody has feedback on how these two projects went, now is the time to give that to us. If you want to give it to us later, we're going to be going through a strategic planning process over the course of the summer, I imagine. And so it's good to have that feedback on what worked and what didn't. We do have a few housekeeping items to go through. The Recovery Roadmap launch event is going to be Wednesday, June 16th at 10 o'clock. It's both in person and virtual. So CCAC will be in the next few days sending out an email with a link on how to register. But the website is really easy to remember. It's just chicagoreturns.com. Then the Burnham Council is having its first in-person event of the year. That's on Thursday, June 17th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. The location is a tavern called Recess at City Hall. It's at 838 West Kinsey Street. So don't go to actual City Hall. I made that mistake. It's actually called Recess at City Hall, and it's located on Kinsey. I'm real excited for our July meeting. One of my best friends and my next door neighbor, State Representative Greg Harris, who is the House Majority Leader. He is the #2 Democrat in the House. He had that same position under Speaker Madigan, and he is so well trusted and so well respected that when it came time to elect a new speaker, the House Democratic Caucus put him in charge of that election process. And then when Speaker Welch was elected, he asked Leader Harris to stay on in that position with the current House. So not a single bill gets voted on in the General Assembly without Leader Harris reviewing it and giving approval. So we'll be real curious to see what Leader Harris has to say at our July meeting. That will be July 13th. We don't have a date yet, but we're putting together a special webinar with the Department of Housing to go over the city's new ARO policy. The commissioner just confirmed that she will do it with me this morning. We're working on a date, and that will be another Burnham Council event date to be forthcoming. And then our sister agency, the Alliance for Regional Development, their annual summit will be held October 18th to 22nd. No surprise, the theme this year will be long-term recovery for the tri-state region. So I think that's all of our housekeeping items. Again, if anybody has any feedback on how CCAC is working with the city and how we can better collaborate and work together, please let us know.
Well, you've all worked very, very hard. So you get August off, and we'll probably start our next round of work after Labor Day. Look forward to you interacting at some of those events that Clint just identified. And without further ado, thank you, Cindy and Gerardo, for an excellent presentation, and everybody for participating. Have a great summer, the first part of it. Take care.